Today, we take a look at the latest generation to take over the populace in the buying power for restaurant and retail businesses over the next 10 years. Understanding their very different traits and habits will make or break your business in the future. Listen in. All right, so welcome back to another episode of the Barron Report, and today we are talking about Gen Z, which is the next generation that we feel might have a large impact on restaurant and retail. And with me today, I've got an expert from the Hartman Group, Miss Shelley Balanko. Great to have you on the show here today.
Excellent, thank you. It's my pleasure for being here.
Shelley, let's learn a little about you and Hartman. What does Hartman do?
Sure. The Hartman Group is a food culture consultancy, and we support clients exclusively in the food and beverage industry, whether they be CPG manufacturers, retailers, or food service providers. And we're happy to say that we just celebrated 30 years of providing consumer insights and trends. Yes, thank you. And our core areas of expertise are health and wellness, the natural and organic marketplace, as well as sustainability. And methodologically, we tend to study consumers in the marketplace from both quantitative and qualitative perspectives. And we not only just offer information, we offer strategic counsel to help move our clients' businesses forward. So that's the Hartman Group.
Very cool. So within that, obviously, Gen Z is a large study group of what you guys are looking at to kind of help forecast and predict some of the things that are happening in the future. So that's perfect for what we talk about here on the food service side of it. So interesting and great to have you. So it's going to be an awesome conversation. Let's go into kind of the first topic, and that is data on kind of the convenience factors for Gen Z, whether it's online ordering, e-commerce, social media, some of the technology aspects of how Gen Z life is enacted throughout their day on an ongoing basis. Your thoughts or any of your findings that are showing what Gen Z is doing in terms of habits, traits, behaviors that could affect their response to restaurant and retail in the next 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. They are going to have a very strong influence on the future of food service. They're a large group, as you noted, that are just now moving out of their parents' homes and starting to exert some major decision-making in terms of their food and beverage purchases and consumption. And you did point out that they are true digital natives. And so we believe that they will embrace all sorts of online discovery as well as ordering in the years to come. And they truly get the value proposition that online offers in terms of convenience as well as savings. And they often wonder why their largely Gen X parents don't do more online food ordering. So that's one thing for certain. Another way in which Gen Z is different is their eating occasions. They actually snack more than other generational cohorts. They've kind of grown up in an environment of snacking where the rest of us were kind of attached to meal rituals. And they live in households that have very hectic schedules, often competing schedules. So they tend to eat alone a lot. They eat away from home, on the go. And so snacking and having menus and food service options that cater to that orientation towards snacking is going to be critical in the future. And we think that is something that they're not going to abandon in adulthood, but rather take that kind of snack orientation into their own adult lives, as well as when they create families of their own. So we think that snacking in particular is going to be a big influence.
So all of what you just said seems to lean toward convenience factors. Are there anything within the behavioral traits that you guys have studied around the, not millennials, the Gen Zs, that enable, because millennials have been very active on convenience factors, even though that they seem to be dining out a little bit more than what we've seen with Gen Zs. What is it about the Gen Zs that really kind of separates them? Because there is some very clear delineations between the two groups. What is it that makes them, other than being digital natives? Is there anything specific that kind of locks them into these convenience factors?
Well, yes. they definitely are focused, and this is like in order of priority from our recent research. They're focused on price, convenience, experience, and then quality.
Okay.
And a lot of that is because they don't have a lot of money. They're not,
Right.
knee deep in a career yet. So they don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of access to their own transportation. So they're often committed to where a bus route goes or something that's walkable from places where they already are, schools, the mall, athletic arenas and whatnot. So that's why they tend to prioritize price and convenience. And with that, they find themselves at QSR a lot of the time, even though they might be preferring the quality that fast casual offers, which is more of a millennial place to eat. And so if their parents are paying, you'll definitely find Gen Z at fast casual. But when they're dining on their own with their friends or alone, they'll be more likely to be at QSR. And I think that that's interesting, given that they are the most educated when it comes to health and wellness.
Right.
They're the one generational cohort that is most savvy when it comes to understanding nutrition facts panels and whatnot, but they tend not to pay attention to those things when dining out. Right now, they are prioritizing. Yeah, It is interesting. They're prioritizing flavor and fun. They're looking for places to hang out with their friends. So it's more about the hangout and the social experience than really the dining out per se. And when they are paying attention to health and wellness, of course, they will tell us that they're avoiding added sugars, chemicals. They appreciate organic food and think that it's healthier for them. But again, that's something that they will choose when somebody else is paying the bill. So that's what they're focusing on right now. And I think the other unique thing about Gen Z relative to millennials is Gen Z, at least now, is preferring more traditional American foods and flavor profiles. And if they are looking at global cuisines, they are showing a preference for the Americanized global cuisines, whereas millennials are like full on into the authentic. But what we did notice is when we cut Gen Z and looked at the older Gen Z individuals, like folks who had already finished high school and were in college, relative to those who were in high school or middle schoolers. As they get a little bit older, they start to demonstrate a preference for bolder, spicier, more authentic, farm-to-table type cuisines. So for now, the younger ones are kind of sticking close to American favorites, but as they get older, we think they'll echo more of a millennial food sensibility.
Yeah. When you look at the two categories, obviously with Gen Z kind of taking over as the most populous group on the planet, now surpassing, I guess this year, 2019, surpassing the millennials, is there anything, if you could pick one or two items that really separated these groups in terms of behavior, is there anything that you would say, these guys do this, these do this?
Yeah, I think I've already noted the Americanized or traditional favorite type eating versus the very adventuresome millennial. I think that the digital exploration and procurement is one thing that will set them apart in the future. And I think also the preference of the Gen Z individual for inclusivity. They're not about being exclusive. They're looking for opportunities to express themselves.
Right.
And so that kind of customization and personalization will be important in the future. And then another important distinction around Gen Z is more and more as they are able to afford it, they will prioritize food that is sourced sustainably, really looking at ingredients that aren't just good for them, but are also good for the planet. So I think that's something that we'll need to pay attention to in the future.
Yeah. So whether you're a retail brand or a restaurant brand, and maybe you're looking at, hey, this is going to be my roadmap of my customers over the next decade. These are the people that are going to be either aging up and into their earning and spending years. What would restaurant brands or retailers be preparing for if they had to really kind of set a roadmap out and say, these are the things we need to be aware of and ready to really make available for our customers that are emerging as our new consumers?
Well, I think one of the key issues that everyone, retail or food service, are going to have to plan for is packaging and waste.
Right.
So, in terms of takeout or delivery, that packaging is going to need to be more eco-friendly, as these folks are really interested in not just caring for themselves and caring for communities, but also caring for the planet. And again, ingredients that are sourced sustainably and are grown in a way that, again, preserves our planet and reduces the impact of climate change. That's going to be important. And then I think more and more concepts that allow for that individual expression will really be something that resonates. So environmental issues and then personal expression and inclusivity.
Interesting. So if you're building a brand or a product, you've obviously, most companies today are really looking at sustainability, environmental impact, carbon footprint, things of that nature. I think to a certain extent, though, some of the companies we see do it, whether it's with packaging, but then they don't necessarily sustainably source their products. So it's kind of you're saving over here, but exploiting over here. And it'll be interesting to see how that weighs out, because that's going to get very complicated, for a young person to kind of make a decision on a company that's, not really walking the walk all the way through.
It's true. And Gen Z will do their due diligence as they get older. They think about these issues more holistically than previous generations. And one thing that we can't forget, especially when it comes to food service, is the impact of labor.
Yep.
So they are going to be not just looking for a food service that sources ingredients sustainably and has eco-friendly packaging, but also that is giving workers a living wage and other benefits, because they are very attuned to issues of social justice.
Interesting. All right. Well, that's good. I mean, when you talk about social justice, obviously we've got social media really playing a big part into that. To a certain extent, we've got social activism happening out there, especially in the food space, where many of these people are really looking into the sourcing and the manufacturing processes. Obviously, we have this plant-based movement, all of these things happening kind of at the same time. How heavy do you feel Gen Z is really going to be moving into that area? Because right now, that's mostly led by a lot of millennials, that are in, their early 30s. They're a little bit more mature. They have a full-time job. They're working out they're experiencing life a little differently. So they're taking more activism style roles. I won't say, in the sense of crazy activism, but just saying, hey, we're going to take a stand on this particular issue. With Gen Z, do you feel like they are going to be as active or even more so?
Yeah, I think we would see comparable, if not increased levels of activism. I mean, right now, most of Gen Z are still at home. They're young. They have other priorities like having fun and just, being teenagers.
Yep.
But they are the woke generation. They are coming of age in a time where they're very aware of inequities in the world. The Me Too movement, they are very aware of climate change, if not experiencing it in their own backyard. They're certainly well aware of global climate change patterns. So I would say that even though they might not be as engaged right now, once they have more independence, they'll also take on more responsibility. So we, from our research, would say that it would be comparable to how millennials are engaging in these issues, if not more so.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, have you followed this story with Greta Thunberg?
A little bit.
Yeah. So she's a Gen Z, and she's really taking, kind of a role to make a stand around climate change, and all in the sense of even her sailing across the Atlantic to come over and speak to the U.S. government around the ideas of what climate change was doing. So it'll be interesting. If that is the kind of fortitude that Gen Z has, then I think all businesses could be in for some big surprises as we go forward, especially if they get behind a particular topic. So that'll be interesting to see how that moves forward.
Yeah,
Another
absolutely.
question Another question I want to go into, and that is the idea of, this was some research we did, of instant gratification and delayed gratification. That was one of the things that in our research that we found that was a very key differentiator between the millennials and the Gen Z. Why do you feel that delayed gratification is more resonating with a Gen Z audience?
Yeah, that's a very good observation and an interesting question. We believe that because Gen Z is more connected to these issues around global warming, like they're living it and this is their future, they're a little bit more contemplative than previous generations regarding the impact of their choices. And so they get that the cheapness of any item has a cost. It might be an environmental cost or a social cost. And so they're very aware of their choices, and we believe that they're a generation that's going to reinvent consumerism. And it's
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, and it's going to focus probably more on quality, like long-term, not just immediate quality, but long-term quality over quantity.
Now, if that were the case, and if the findings are, when you look at instant gratification versus delayed gratification, let's take a look at something around fast fashion, which was kind of a trend that was here and gone in the millennial age, where if Gen Z is really in that kind of moment of being able to look at something and go, hey, listen, we're going to go with the artisan maker of my wool sweater because they only make 500 of these a year and it's a very sustainable farm and those kind of things. Do you feel like that we could see shifts in CPG and retail moving to much higher quality levels as opposed to quantity levels?
Yeah, perhaps. We recently did an update to our sustainability syndicated research, and what we saw more in millennials, because they are living more independently than Gen Z, but Gen Z is starting to show a similar pattern, is that there is an interest among the younger generational cohorts in dramatically changing their pattern of consumerism and opting out in many instances. And so preferring to perhaps get their clothes or their furniture secondhand and eschew a car in favor of walking or biking or taking public transportation. So we do see the younger generational cohorts more interested in making dramatic behavioral changes and in that direction of opting out of consumerism than we see among, say, boomers or Gen Xers.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to watch because as we see, because this was kind of the era of the millennials, we saw a little different millennial in their teens and early 20s than they are today. It's the same millennial, but their perceptions of, the globe, working, obviously now the responsibilities laid upon you as a human in our society starts to shift. And once those things start to happen, the boundaries start to move. It'll be interesting to see if the Gen Z population stays with their convictions or if they're like the millennials and they kind of flow with what's happening at the time.
Yeah, well, a lot of it has to do with life stage. That's one thing we found
Exactly.
when we were studying millennials is when millennials were, newly leaving their parents' homes and making choices, their choices were very different from their parents in terms of food and beverage. And then when they started to have families of their own, they actually kind of went back to brands and experiences that they grew up on. So a lot of it has to do with life stage. And, the presence of children in a household can have a dramatic effect on everything. As
no doubt about it. Baby on board changes everything you can imagine. We have a couple of those young ones right now, and they've changed our entire life. So, all right, so let's talk about the McKinsey material and study, which was the Breakout of Generations. I'm going to have some material here on screen for those of you who are watching, but essentially it was a report that McKinsey did on a breakout of the boomers, Gen X, Gen Y being the millennials, and Gen Z. Your thoughts on kind of how they broke it out from context, behavior, and consumption. Are you in agreement with kind of where they see the markets standing there?
Yeah, I would have to say that, More so than not, the Hartman Group would be in agreement with how they've defined the generational cohorts. We use slightly different age breaks. For example, we identify Gen Z as individuals born in 1998 or later, so just a little bit of differences there. And then I think the one thing that we would add in terms of Gen Z is that in addition to being pragmatic, Gen Z is also interestingly debt averse. So
Okay.
they aren't totally abandoning the American dream. However, their path to getting there isn't exactly clear. So, they, again, remember they were growing up in a time of economic recovery from the Great Recession. Either their older siblings or perhaps their parents themselves have been struggling with student loan debt. So they're a little bit more cautious and definitely debt averse.
Interesting. For our podcast listeners who maybe are not seeing some of these breakouts, this study showed context in the boomers' post-war dictatorship and repression in Brazil. These are the things that were contextually affecting them in their society at that time. Gen X was political transition, capitalism, and meritocracy dominant. Gen Y was globalization, economic stability, and emergence of the internet and digital. And then, of course, Gen Z, mobility and multiple realities, meaning I think social media and all the things that we're seeing in terms of gaming and et cetera, social networks and digital natives as being kind of the core competency of what Gen Z is all about. Behavior, idealism, revolutionary, and collectivist for boomers, materialistic, competitive, and individualistic for Gen X, globalist, questioning, and orient to self on Gen Y, and on Gen Z, it was undefined ID, which I thought was a very interesting point there, and communaholic, dialoguer, and realistic. So these were some very interesting. I would recommend for our listeners and viewers, if you have not had a chance, just search Gen Z and McKinsey.com, because that's a study that I thought was kind of intriguing on how they broke out the generations and their behaviors and things that were affecting them. I'm going to end up with the last question here, talking about food service and kind of the future, and where we're going to see the food service market over this next decade. Because now you've got a Gen Zer that's probably 24, 5, 6. In 10 years, that's a 36-year-old person that's probably well into leading a company or a career. Where and what impacts do you feel food service is going to face in this next decade with this large population influx?
Sure. We would say that there's probably three key areas that are going to be important for Gen Z in the future. One, technology. They've fully embraced novel ways to discover and procure food. So really, innovation, the field is wide open because they'll be receptive to anywhere, anyhow, as far as tech innovations are concerned in food procurement. Secondly, occasions, and I've mentioned this previously, but this more snack-oriented eating will probably carry over into adulthood. And as they get busier and are living even more on the go, snacking may become even more relevant, which I think will have a big impact on menu trends, certainly. And then finally, sustainability. And there's a few components of sustainability that will be important. One, packaging, and we've mentioned this, takeout and delivering packaging will absolutely have to be eco-friendly because this is a conscious consumer. Ingredient sourcing, they are the most educated health and wellness generational cohort. And as they get older, they will make more and more of their food and beverage decisions with health and wellness in mind and probably start to deprioritize that fun and flavor. And so they're looking for ingredients that are healthy for them, but also healthy for the planet and any human workers and animals involved in production. And then finally, labor. Labor is a piece of sustainability because they do think about it very holistically. So social justice and equity issues are going to be important, and they'll look at the entire supply chain.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm going to wrap it with that. I've got Shelley Balanko, who is a Ph.D. in social psychology with the Hartman Group. It has been great having you on, talking about the next generation. They are here now, so we got to get ready. And for those of you listening in, make sure and subscribe on iTunes or over on Spotify. You can, of course, tag us there. If you leave us a rating, write a note. That's how we get information back here on the Barron Report, learn a little bit more about what you want to listen to or who you'd like to have on this podcast. And if you have an idea for a guest, make sure and send it to producer@foodabletv.com. We will catch you soon right here on the Barron Report.